Hello and welcome to the Coder Kids podcast. I'm James Thornack as always, and today we have a special guest on the program. This is guest number 2 from Fearless, and which says nothing about their importance, right? But the guest we have on is Nicole Zonnenberg, which there's some fun meaning behind that name. You can look it up and research it yourself, I guess, but you can split it into 2 parts. So bonus points if you put in YouTube comments what you think it means. Berg means mountain. We'll just go with that, and then you can figure out the rest. But she is a software engineer at Fearless, a digital services firm located in downtown Baltimore. Outside of engineering, Nicole has a passion for community building and loves to discuss long-lasting community infrastructure that supports accessibility and equitability for marginalized groups. When she's not writing code or working on community events, she likes to play video games, swing dance, or hang upside down on a trapeze. So welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me. It's so nice to meet you.
Yeah.
Well, I got to watch your interview with my friend Bryant, so I knew what I was up for.
All about Scrum, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I learned things from that interview.
Yeah, you betcha. Like I'd never heard of Scrum and that, and the way to think about whether it's project management or I guess a school project or any kind of learning, it's interesting. And what really, interested me in that podcast, and I think just really what I found really interesting was like when his eyes lit up when he talked about like getting humans to be productive and how it's like a little bit like herding cats and it's really messy, right? And but like that's what he loves. Like he loves getting teams to be productive and working together. And that's hard. Like, and that's also required in every industry, in every job. And so yeah, we need more people out there like him. But let's talk about you. So we are, I keep saying we. Used to be Jeff and myself on this podcast. Now it's just me. I guess this forces
the royal
me.
We.
Yeah, this forces me into like interim announcement. Jeff Ward, founder of Coder Kids, he actually got a full-time job, and so he's not going to be on the podcast anymore. So it's just going to be me. So if you love Jeff, feel free to write him an email. But if you like me, you can stick with the podcast. No big deal. But that announcement aside, there's so many things. Let's actually talk to you. So.
Okay.
You are now at Fearless. We know kind of the end of the story. It's a little bit like watching a show and you're like, well, the protagonist isn't going to die. Like, it's like watching the season finale and then you go back and watch all the episodes. So
sure.
we know in your life story you haven't died, or at least you were brought back at some point.
Not that I know of, so.
But we are really into origin stories here. Okay. And so let's talk about like what got you interested in technology in the first place, and how did you tinker, and what was your story kind of growing up?
Absolutely. Gosh, I'm trying to think of the best place to start. I guess, so you were asking how I first got into technology.
Yeah.
I kind of started it was 5th grade, 6th grade. The internet was like coming into its own. Like I was a part of like the Harry Potter message boards as the movies were coming out, Neopets before MySpace. And I don't remember how, but I found these websites done by people seemingly in middle school, high school, who are making these layouts out of anime images. And I loved anime at the time. And so you could download them, and I learned how, I opened these CSS and HTML files in Notepad, and I learned how to break them and rebuild them, and then break them and then customize them. And it was slowly a learning process. And then some of them had JavaScript, broke those, rebuilt those, and it became to where I could make my own web pages for myself and my friends. And then that translated eventually to Neopets, to MySpace. And it was a hobby. It was something that I did for fun. And if any of those tech people, like I learned how to make like iframes and tables. Like now it's all divs all the way down. But before there used to be multiple ways to build layout. But yeah, it was just this hobby that I did on the side of everything else. I never considered it to be a viable career because I wasn't smart enough, quote unquote, to be an engineer. That was something that my brother was really good at. He physically built things, and like he would build his friends and himself his own skateboards. Like he was much more of the engineering side. So I thought that I was like, oh, that's not me. And I was a really good student. I made mostly A's and B's, but math was my weakest point. So again, I thought I had to be good at math to be an engineer. Okay. Spoiler, you don't. You write the code to be good at math for you. I never do my own math. But what changed my view of that is when I was studying for the SAT, specifically for the math portion, I found a really amazing tutor. And we were trying out this problem, and I can't remember the problem or what exactly we were working on, but I wanted to try it a different way than what the book was telling us to. And we tried it. It worked once, and it didn't work again when we tried it with a different problem. But it worked once, and my tutor sat back, and he was just like, "You're not bad at math. You think differently than how math books teach." And that really changed how I framed whenever I hit a wall with something. It's like, okay, this isn't working. Can I find someone who can translate this into a way I can understand it?
So I want to know the solution. Like, how is, like, do you know how it differed?
I legitimately cannot remember. I remember it had something to do with graphs and plotting like a parabola or something, because I was trying to remember this because it's something that I always bring up when people get really frustrated when they're learning something and they're not getting it, and maybe they don't have a teacher that had the time to take them aside and really focus on where they were being lost. But I'm a very visual person, and I like colors and everything. I was actually really good at chemistry because I had a really good chemistry teacher who, when she did equations, each variable had a corresponding color. So I could follow it a lot easier. When it was all the same color, I got really lost and I couldn't keep track of where the variables were going.
Okay.
And so when you learn stuff like that, it makes things a lot easier and to apply to different portions of your learning experience.
Yeah, for sure. Oh gosh, I have so many questions now.
Oh yeah, no, I love it. But I love VS Code and different programs like VS Code for coding, because it will color code like different tags, variables, what certain things are. And that just makes, for me, so much easier. Like it boggles my mind that I used to code in Notepad, which was white and black text on white background.
Yeah. There's something about it, right? That triggers, emotions in our own brain, and yeah, there's all sorts of stuff about color coding that's nice. But it basically tells the brain, like, hey, this belongs in this category, and then it doesn't have to. That basically offloads the work of your brain having to read it and then determine, okay, where does this fall? Just like as a simple example, like, if you're looking in the fridge, instead of like looking at the fridge, you're like, I really need some protein. Instead of like you looking for like meat or, tofu or whatever you have for protein. And I have my own opinions about what's good protein, but like, it's just like color coded. And actually a lot of the packaging, is already messaging that, right? Like, if it comes in a tub or if it has like a certain color coding, like, that a red and white Target is like the store Target, right? Like, it messages that to you in a way that you don't have to think like, you don't have to like look at an object and think like deeply, like, does that have protein inside, and experiment. And it's like, no, it's on the packaging and it just shows you. Now, that doesn't fix all the problems, right? Because it's good to analyze code and go deeply, and it's probably really good to analyze your food, although this is not a food podcast. But Yeah, certainly those tools are nice because they can free up like your internal processing, all like the
Yeah.
processing that your brain actually has to do. So,
And I will say the other thing that really helped me grasp certain concepts is applicability. I think
okay.
a lot of students, a lot a lot of students get really frustrated. It's like, when am I ever going to use this? I
Oh
used
yeah.
to coach students in dance, which was super easy because I wasn't even a real teacher. They just showed up and I just made sure we stayed on task. I didn't have to like make them do anything that they didn't want to do. But some of them would complain to me. It's just like, oh, when am I ever going to need algebra? And I was like, I use algebra all the time. Like, it's just a different way of, because when you're presented with a problem, it's just presenting you a way to figure out a problem where you don't have all the pieces.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like
And
parenting. You don't know
yeah.
how many variables there are over there. There are a lot of them.
Yeah, so I use for them because they're like getting their driver's license. I'm like, when you guys go out, you get a meal together and they can't split the check. So you have to decide you have to determine like how to divide a check, how many ways. One way to set that up is an algebraic equation. But your brain automatically does that for you. This is just teaching you a way to write it out and solve for a variable that you might not even know exists until you write it out.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so just those really applicable things. And then they're like, well, why don't they teach us that in school? And I was like,
because they don't do it right.
Because I think schools are a lot focused on test scores rather than did the student learn the skill and can they apply it later.
Man, okay, I have a
Sorry,
couple questions.
We're getting into my own philosophy of school, but
no, that's actually part of the point of this podcast. We did like about an hour and 15 minutes of educational philosophy on the previous podcast. So
oh, that's awesome.
this is not uncommon. If someone's listening to this podcast regularly, we get into educational philosophy, and that is kind of the point of this, and technology, right? And the convergence of those two. I do really quickly want to ask you about what you said, how you said like you didn't think you were smart enough, or you brought your brother into this, so sorry brother if this is an unfair comparison.
I love my brother. I think that him building skateboards out of our garage is one of the coolest things I can like think of. Like he wanted to learn how to skateboard. Yeah. And so he just built a skateboard. Like who does that? My brother.
Oh wow. That actually is pretty cool. We had another podcast, James Peterson's going live on this Friday, I guess. I mean, by the time this podcast is out, it'll already be out. But it's all about the tinker mindset, and so we talk a little bit about Arduino and Raspberry Pi and stuff. But yeah, it's super fun to be able to have that kind of like physical engineering aspect of it. You don't have to for software engineering, like we've talked about. So the focus of the question really is, there was some kind of barrier to you believing something that was actually true, right? So like you were believing something that was like objectively false now with retrospect, right? Because retrospect is 2020. You can see like, what the truth really was. Some people, have incorrect beliefs about themselves for years and years and possibly decades. And some people go to their graves with it. So I do think this is an important question. So let me I keep trying to formulate it. But the question is, like, what was it you think that kept you from believing the truth? And the truth being that you were smart enough to do this thing. And the second question is there anything we could do to like remove or add something to make it easier for other people when either they're growing up or in other circumstances for them to be able to believe the truth about themselves, that they can do most things?
No, those are really great questions. So can I repeat the question in a different way just to make sure I understand it?
Yeah, please do.
You're asking is there something that could have happened earlier so that I, instead of initially thinking I would be bad at this, just not have that roadblock at all, just immediately jump to, I could do this. Is that roughly it, or did I miss something?
I mean, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
So and we're going to get into a little more educational philosophy.
Sure. Go for it.
But just not, no one was able to help me understand where I was getting caught. And ultimately it came down to being able to translate different mathematical ideas in a way that I understood it. I know, for example, bringing it more to the present, like we're reworking our entire application that I'm working on. And so we're having to redo the entire workflows. I'm mostly a front-end engineer, and I was misunderstanding. There was like a lot of people talking. I was misunderstanding what the workflow was going to be. So I drew it out. Like I was like, here's the form. then it, in the background, this is happening. And then we approve it in the back end, and then we send an email, and I had to draw it out. And then people were like, okay, this step isn't there. And so we erased that step. And it's just knowing how you break down information and how you can explain it in different ways.
Yeah. Because
I'm sure we've all, like, there are visual learners, people who are auditory, kinesthetic, where they have to physically do something to help it really lodge in their brains. And most of us use multiple ways.
Yeah.
Sometimes I have to see something fail in order to understand what the right way is.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that also failure is, the idea of something failing is so scary to people. It's just like, we have to show them how it works. It's like, yes, but you also have to show them what it looks like when something doesn't work.
Yeah.
And I think that kids really respond to that. It's just like, I'm trying to think of something like, so I do circus. You mentioned that I do trapeze.
Sure.
And a lot of the times I can watch someone do a trick, but sometimes that does not translate to how I move my body. So I have to get up in the trapeze, and my coach has to be like, okay, now reach your right arm to the wall or above your head. And I have to physically try and go places where I can't physically move my body in order to understand why that's not the way to do the trick.
Okay.
Like I have to go up there and I have to try it, and I'm going to fail. I have fallen out of the trapeze a lot, and it's safe.
I imagine there's a net.
Oh, I'm not that high up. There's a crash mat.
Okay.
But like sometimes, like, I can't physically turn a certain way because my arm's in the way. I have to go the other way around. And sometimes that my brain won't make sense of that until I'm physically up in the air trying it. And just because I don't get it immediately doesn't mean I can't do the trick.
Okay. I'm trying not to infer too much, but I'm trying to understand here. So what you're saying is theory's all well and good, but until I'm putting something into practice, be that on a trapeze or be that a way to do math, you have to be able to try it to see if it works, to then even be able to move on to actually learning anything else. Is that accurate?
Yeah.
Okay.
I would say that's an excellent, and I like what we're doing, which is we're saying the same thing, but in very different ways.
Yeah, we are.
So there are going to be people that are going to hear, there are going to be people that hear what I'm saying that are going to be like, that makes total sense. And there are going to be people hearing what you're saying and like, oh my gosh, that's what she was saying. She was speaking another language, and that's okay.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of schools, like, we wait until a kid fails a test to know.
That's the indicator at the end of the year.
To know that they're not getting it. And I don't think that's too late, but I think that maybe, but instead of being like, you failed a test, that's bad. It's like, hey, we notice you're consistently not getting like these types of problems. Let's go over it. And I don't think schools allow teachers to have the time to do that. Like, I think of when I was in school, and it's just, there's not enough time in the day, especially like I went to school where you had 8 classes a day.
Yeah.
40 minutes a class, maybe.
8.
Like,
goodness. 8 periods?
Like, I remember crazy. 8 periods.
I'm not like disbelieving.
No,
I'm just saying that's so crazy. I'm just like, please don't do that.
5 minutes to calm down. 15 minutes per class, but you get 5 minutes in the beginning, 5 minutes at the end to like calm down, like get settled, that's 40 minutes a class. Like, what are you going to do when you have 25 students in a class?
Not much. Yeah.
So it's, and I don't blame teachers. I think that the system is really stacked against them. But it's just like and luckily I had, my family had the means to get me a tutor that allowed this one-on-one, like, direct feedback. And he got to watch me work through the problem and made me talk it out.
Yeah. Oh, gosh, that's so true, right? What we could all have done with tutors growing up, right? It'd be incredible.
But you were asking me how to make sure, but it's also a frame of mind. It's just like learning that failure isn't the end of something. It's just learning what doesn't work. Let's come back and let's try and find another way. Mm-hmm. And I think that especially growing up in the 90s, like, failure was just such a definitive end to something. It's like, oh, well, you failed. You can't do it again.
You're not good at that. Better try something else. Yeah.
We got to find what you're instantly good at, or it's not worth working on.
Right. Yeah,
There's no patience.
It'd be interesting to see if, like, to check out a randomized controlled trial or something to see if, like, patience has increased or decreased over time. The instant gratification crowd, I think you'd see decreases, but at the same time, in our own Discord server, we have a Coder Kids Arcade, and there's some kids in there who have uploaded some of their, like, Blender renders, and
that's incredible
objects that they've created, and, like, one looked like a photorealistic banana, just for an example, just for, like, a real example, and I thought, that took some patience. So it's I'm not sure where patience is, because I've seen really great examples in the youngest
but also patience with yourself, and stuff like that. I think that also, like, a lot of it was my framing, which was, if I'm not instantly good at something, I don't like it.
Sure.
And a question I've started asking myself is, do I not like this because I'm bad at it, or because I just don't like it? Because there are things that I'm like, if I was good at them, I'd still hate it.
Like golf. Oh yeah. Like what?
No offense if you like golf.
Yeah.
No offense if you like golf, but I'm could not care less how
golf.
I probably could, if I was amazing at golf, I still probably would not like it.
Yeah, I think I'm in that boat. I think the thing I like most about golf is just being in the sun. I think that's probably the thing I like most.
But you can be in the sun in different ways. So.
Oh yeah, I'm just trying to find something I like about it.
but when I think about coding, it's just like, well, do I not like this language because I'm bad at it and I'm new at it and I'm struggling to wrap my head around it, or do I not like this language because I actually don't like it? And I think that there are much better languages out there.
I think that's a valuable question for parents to know exists, because kids will get frustrated in the middle of camps and classes. And
absolutely.
I don't know if that question is asked all the time. So yeah, definitely put that one in your quiver, parents. That one's good.
And the way around that is, if a kid is getting frustrated, it's because they just keep running up against a wall that honestly doesn't even exist. It's a wall that has been created through expectations, through the kids' expectations or what they perceive as others' expectations of them. And it's just being okay to fail, being okay to fall down and make mistakes. And I always use myself as an example in learning, like, the amount of times I've just fallen flat on my face, both literally and figuratively. And it's just knowing that you can fail and get back up and then succeed. I think that as a kid, I just don't think that ever sunk in.
So Nicole, in order to, make the world a better place, you know, just like in the description about you, I mean, you're trying to support accessibility and equitability. So let's say if you could Control-Alt-Delete the public education system and start over again.
If only I could do that.
Now, I'm a bit of a libertarian, so I don't like authoritarian thought experiments that much, but it's a little bit fun to do it sometimes.
Fair.
So if you had the option, would you replace some of the subject matter with more like how to learn? Like, hey, let's try this method with with you and see if it works, and let's try this method of just learning in general, and let's see how it does in your different classes, and then let's just review the learning style and focus on that. Do you think that would be beneficial? Is that what you're saying?
I unfortunately I'm not an educator expert, so there might be a better way to phrase this, but I think that we focus too much on results versus learning the actual skill. Like it's the fish versus the fishing. Like it's just can a student take this idea and apply it in multiple places, or are they only good with this skill on a test that is sometimes even arbitrary on whether or not they get an A or a B? Like I was a liberal arts major in college. I loved being a liberal arts major. I wouldn't trade it for the world. And if we ever get to that part of my story, I have skills that I've learned in that, and as a liberal arts major, that I've carried over to software engineering that I think makes me a better software engineer. And that's me learning a skill versus being able to write a paper that a professor's arbitrarily decided somewhat that it deserves an A or a B.
Okay.
So it's more because some things are just arbitrary and we can't really control that. But can I go and I take these skills and use them regardless? Like I think coding is already becoming normalized in schools. I know my youngest cousin is taking basically a coding class. It's not called coding. I don't know what it's called, but I'm like, you're learning how computers work. And I think because no job's not going to be touched by technology, and knowing how computers work will be beneficial to you, whether or not you are in the tech field or not.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So I think what you're doing is fantastic. I'm like, this is necessary at this point.
We're trying.
Yeah.
Well, I want to get back to your story. You've got a lot of like interesting, I call them like waypoints, probably all along your way to coding, with, doing websites and stuff, like as in your own words, like a hobby. So take me on that journey.
Sure. So again, I didn't think I was good enough to be an engineer. I was for either because I was naturally good at it, or it's just because that's where people saw strengths in me and encouraged me. I was going to go into communications, like public relations, journalism, that kind of thing. Decided I didn't want to my first year of college because, and honestly, after this past 4 years, I'm glad I didn't. I think this news cycle would have killed me. Because especially public relations, it just made it sound like, oh, you work for a company, the company messed up, it's your turn to spin that in a positive way. And I'm like, that sounds terrible. I don't want to do this. Yeah. So after a lot of hemming and hawing, I love art. I love the artistic stuff. Like I dance, I do circus, because those are very artistic ways to exercise. I hate exercising, so I have to be very creative on how I exercise. Right. But so I had friends who were artists, like really amazing artists, like could do a life-size sketch of you in like an hour and whatever. And I was like, well, I'm not there, but what could I do adjacent to that? And my friend of mine was like, look into art history. So I became an art history major, and I ended up graduating with a history and criticism of art degree. Nice. And I really loved it. And part of that was because the teachers at my school were so fantastic, and they were good at telling stories. And that's what history is. It's a story. And the way you look at art it's basically how most people communicated. Like when you think about history, literacy was not a universal assumption until very recently. How politicians communicated, how the church communicated, how people communicated with each other was through pictures. And so when you look at a piece of art that's from like hundreds or even more recently, like they're trying to tell you something. Like they're trying to either tell you a biblical story, they're trying to describe what show you what an ideal society or an ideal person looks like. A lot of politicians would paint themselves as biblical figures to impart their importance to the general public.
Can you give me
A
an
lot
example? I'm super curious. I'm a history major.
No, absolutely. During college, one of my favorite jobs I got to do was be a tour guide in Florence, Italy. And I got to go through the Palazzo Vecchio, which is still where the Florence government sits. And it's been like that since the 1499. I can be specific. And so the Medicis were a big family that were dukes for like forever. And one of the dukes, I forget which one, I want to say his name was Constantine, but he depicted himself as Moses. And that was just so
like parting the Red Sea, or with this
like bringing his people to salvation, like provide, because Florence was the first democratic seat in what would become Italy.
Okay.
So this was them being like, we're a state, we govern ourselves, we don't answer to royalty.
Okay. So he depicted himself as Moses, like in speeches and in art? Is what you're saying?
I can't speak for the speeches, probably in speeches. But the art would honestly probably would go farther than speeches. Like speeches, you can change what people say. It's just like a game of telephone. It's just like, well, I was at the speech yesterday and I heard this, and then they tell, and so it's a different speech. But art, you can just travel around with a painting and someone to describe you as like, look how great this person is. He's Moses.
Oh, that's wild.
And you can't deny what the picture's depicting. So.
The permanence, the effect of images on people it's really
always been
hard
here
to fully understand. And it's seriously impactful, right?
So I loved it. I had a really great storytellers. It made history really personal because it made me think, it's like, okay, if I was alive during this time, I probably wouldn't be literate. So this is what I'd be looking at. Well, this is what my leaders would want me to think and believe. So it's that kind of storytelling. And then I graduated. I got an unpaid internship at the Guggenheim in New York City. So I had to get other jobs, one of which being a chocolate factory was my first paid job out of college, which I think is a fun fact.
Yeah, definitely. So, so what was it like at the chocolate factory? I know you worked on a website there for that.
I mean, I updated their website. No one was really working on it. Like they paid someone to set it up and it just sat there, and
that happens quite a bit.
Yeah. And I mean, they didn't change their wares a lot, but I was noticing like some options weren't there. Like some options that were added weren't there. And so I knew enough where it was like a WordPress type of site. So I was like, I could figure out enough to like add things and take away things and like change the banner. And it's just something I enjoyed. Again, not thinking that it was a marketable skill I had for some reason. And
even though you're doing it at work,
even though I'm doing
hindsight,
it at work,
right? It's all hindsight.
even though doing it at work, and I ended up working in the internet store, so answering calls, putting chocolate in boxes and shipping them out, and I killed my sweet tooth for a while. So.
Oh, did? Okay. Because it was just like you were surrounded by it, or what?
We were actually encouraged to taste the chocolate so we could describe what certain things were.
Okay.
So like the really sweet stuff got really sickening after a while.
Yeah, I imagine.
But it was good chocolate. The factory was in Brooklyn, and it was my first paid job. I was also a part-time waitress again, it was New York City. It was expensive. One of my jobs wasn't paying me. So
yeah,
had to make things work. So that wasn't working. And then I realized at my time at the Guggenheim that in order to do anything with my degree, I'd have to go on to school and get a master's at the bare minimum. And then they want you to specify. They want you to specify what you want to learn. Didn't know that. Honestly, had been burnt out by the end of my senior semester. Wasn't really dying to get back into the classroom. I liked being a tour guide. I liked applying my knowledge and learning, but doing something with it. Like just learning something and taking a test and learning something and taking a test was like not something I wanted to do. So I moseyed around for a bit. I came to Baltimore mostly because I knew people here. I didn't want to move back to Florida, which is where my family was at the time. And then I got a job as an administrator at Johns Hopkins in a surgical lab. I have never wanted to do medicine. That is something I have known since I was a kid. I can't stand the sight of blood, but you don't have to do that when you're an administrator. And I worked on the lab's website. It was a WordPress website. I helped a med student that worked with the lab create a site for people who were looking for information about donating live donations for kidneys. I worked for a kidney surgeon.
Okay.
And it genuinely enjoyable. It was WordPress, but I was still doing like my own little widgets, creating those icons. And I'm trying to remember like what was the final kicker, but it just became I wasn't going anywhere. There wasn't anywhere for me to move if I wanted to make more money or do anything. I went back to maybe communications as a job. Again, news cycle was really not enticing me to do that. So then I looked back and I was like, well, the parts of my jobs I really liked were the web work, and I still enjoyed doing it, and I still remembered how to do it. Like I still could do it in a concise way. And so I was like, well, I need to learn back end. I don't really know outside of basic HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. I like in person, so I found an in-person coding bootcamp, and I went there for 3 months. And my first job was a JavaScript developer for the U.S. Coast Guard, and then I work at Fearless.
Nice. That's a story.
It is a story.
That is pretty incredible. About your story, I did have this question though. You said when that is not the quote that I was looking for. Okay. It was basically that you saw school as this thing that you didn't want to go back to. And you mentioned that. And I was wondering is there something that schools could do to be better, like offer the student more or be more interesting to not be like somewhere where people don't want to go back to, people want to get out of, other than the fact that you're just not going to be making money going to school. What do you think?
Other than how expensive it is, so depending on what school.
Okay, so price, that's another thing.
Price is one thing. Price is one thing again, and as you said, I probably wouldn't be working, or if I was working, it'd be part-time, and probably in something that's not going to be making me enough money to be comfortable. But also just like I think the boot camps, it's the length of it all as well. Like 3 months I could sit down and put my head down for 3 months. And if I wasn't making money during those 3 months, but I had enough money for 3 months, whereas, 2 to 4 years, the difference is insane. And then I know, for example, MICA, the Maryland Institute College of the Arts, is considering a boot camp style for artists, because especially for artists, like we need artists. And we need them to make money, but if they're going to spend 4 years accumulating debt, that makes it really hard for them to stay in their industry. And ultimately, an artist
too, yeah,
and where it's competitive. But I also see a lot of similarities between artists and coders. Like, what is more important than your education when you're looking for a job? It's your portfolio. Like you can send a resume and like have on your resume like, oh. Yeah, I went to these schools, but if you have experience, like that weighs so much more. So I like the idea of like internships might be the wrong word, but like work study, like you go and work for like a place will pay for you to like continue your education. So you're learning, and a business might be benefiting from you, but you're also getting practical experience.
Yeah.
Which is invaluable. And a lot easier to point at and be like, look at what I can do. I have this versus like I made A's on all my tests.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, right. What A's on tests qualifies you for is to get A's on tests in life. And like, what does that actually mean? And it means like to jump through hoops like pretty well and to meet requirements even if they seem arbitrary. So I will say there is some value in that
there is. You know, and it also proves that you can follow through. It proves that you can follow through and you can, but I think you're only catering to one type of student.
Yeah. Yeah.
And also a type of student that has the means to go to school and I always come back to that because I know so many people who are just struggling to get out of debt and who have changed to coding because they can make more money to get out of debt.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. When you're building stuff. Yeah. Yeah. That is so true. So are you a fan then of the bootcamp style format? I mean,
I was really lucky. I think I had an amazing boot camp experience. My teachers were wonderful. I wanted a physical person to be like in person, be like, I don't understand this. Can you sit next to me and walk me through it? Like I'm very that like digital is good when it has to be digital, but like there's just something where you're in person. I can focus better. Also my cohort was really good. We all really got along and we all helped each other. Like there was there's a communal, like we are all in this together. Like no one's left behind. Like if someone wasn't understanding something and the teacher was busy, a student who did get it would more than likely be like, hey, let's sit down. Let's try and go through this.
Well, Nicole, you bring up something
or we learn together. So.
Yeah. So you said we learn together. So yeah, this is really interesting. Nicole, you brought something up that like it clicked in my head, which is in a school, it's like default competitive. Yeah.
Sure.
Because
yeah, absolutely. Because, you have the valedictorian, the salutatorian, you have the ranking.
And everybody else after them, right? Hierarchically.
Yeah.
So with the coding bootcamp, nobody necessarily cares where.
But there's no grades in a coding bootcamp, and how well you do doesn't determine. It's pass fail.
Yeah. Okay.
Like they're trying, like it was pass fail. You had to there were tests, and you had to get a certain quote unquote. I'm using finger quotes. A quote unquote test and you had to quote unquote get a certain number of questions right. But that was mostly to understand. Okay, you know enough that you won't be lost as we continue through this. Because we learned JavaScript, then we learned React. So we're not going to go straight into React.
So they were like understanding checks. Yeah,
they were understanding checks. You got at least one more chance to retake the test. Okay. They were open note. Okay. You could look at whatever you wanted to. So it wasn't necessarily there's a correct answer. It's just like, is the way you're doing, like, does it work? And then, if you were struggling, like, it's like, okay, the teacher would bring you aside. It's like, okay, let's figure this out. And I have to stress, like, no one wants you to fail. And I feel like that is something that in schools isn't always the case.
Yeah. Weird, right?
It's not that anyone wants you to fail in school, but they're not like paying attention. And I will also say, like, just the value of being around people who weren't afraid to be like, I don't understand this, because I fully believe in the mindset. It's just like, if you have a question, there's someone else in the room who has that same question. So you might as well ask, even if they don't know it. Like I've had people ask questions or been in situations where someone asks a question and you hear in the back of the classroom before the answer isn't even there. It's just like, oh yeah, I don't understand that either. And it's so they don't even know that that's a question that they have until someone else asks it. Yeah. And then another invaluable thing that I have is I have a lovely team. I love my team so much. And one of the reasons is that one of the senior engineers on my team is absolutely not afraid to be like, I don't understand this. Let's work together and figure this out. Like me, a more junior engineer. And like the title doesn't matter. Like he has more experience than me. But I came to him with a question he didn't know. It's just like, okay, let's figure this out. And I'm with him while he learns and I learn.
Yeah.
And it's not an experience thing. It's not how long he's been working in the industry. I actually taught him some JavaScript because he's mostly worked with C++ and Ruby.
Okay.
But I knew more JavaScript. He's like, how do you debug a JavaScript file? I'm like, let me tell you about console.
Let's go, brother.
Let me tell you. I know there's tools for JavaScript. I am a console.log person. But yeah, it's just, you're never too experienced or too big to learn. And also that mindset. And I think that also it's just like, I think kids also get in the idea that like, adults don't ask questions. Adults know what's going on.
Wow.
Adults have it figured out. Adults have it figured out, and the more adult I am, the more I'm like, no, we don't have it figured out. We're all just kind of.
We could use some help. Yeah, please help, please. Yeah, so that is so interesting. The way that you're talking about learning and education, with a lowercase e is really interesting because I think often we think about getting into the best schools or getting the best grade or and it's like. It really looks like a giant competitive match, right? Like a series of games that lasts like, kindergarten through 12th grade, which is, 13 years. So that's not
minimum
a high stakes game. Yeah. This is like minimum. And then you've got, no one finishes a degree in 4 years anymore. They average just like 5 or 6.
Really? I finished mine in 4 years, but there was no way I was going to do a 5th year. I'm like, I will not finish if I have to stick around for a 5th year.
Right. So
that was me.
Even 4 years though. Okay. So you've basically extended this game for, I think I like calling it a game because it makes it feel less bad than calling it school. So,
well, it's a system. It's a system that we have built around ourselves. And we can't tear it down because people exist in it, like jobs exist in it.
It gets messy for sure. So you have this, iterative game, and then at the end of it, you're supposed to be like the individual who's participated within the system is supposed to be like job ready or whatever. But yeah, I'm not sure that's the outcome that we're actually working toward. And
it's also like this idea that like there is a win, there's an end game.
Yeah.
That there is a win option. And it's just like if you had told me anytime before like 2017, not even 2018, which is when I made the decision to go into a boot camp, I would have looked at you like you were insane. Like, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to be insert something you can do with art history here because I still love art history. Actually, one thing that I kind of skipped over, the reason why I moved to Baltimore is because I wanted to own a swing dance venue.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I was the president of the swing dance club in college. I loved it. It was an enjoyable activity. I loved teaching swing dancing. I came here in Baltimore because Baltimore has one of the best venues on the East Coast. And I'm really good friends with those owners now, and I've taught for them. And teaching, if you even if you're not good at teaching, if you can be in the teacher role, like if you can exist in a teacher-like role, and if not be comfortable, be not uncomfortable in it, you will go far. Because if you can translate, if you can impart ideas in different ways, you're good. Like you will be an asset to whatever job, company, field you are in. Because let me tell you about teaching. Try to teach people to dance without being able to use right and left.
Oh, that's tough.
Because there are people that when they're dancing, they're really freaked out, especially if they're attached to another person, because that's what swing dancing is. It's dancing with another person. And you're
swinging.
Like, extend and you're going in a circle and you're like, extend your right hand. And most people will be like left. And I'm like, your other right hand. So what do you do? And I'll tell you the answer to that question, at least, is you use your physical surroundings. It's like, okay.
In and out.
The arm closest to the bar. that's the orientation that you're going to use. You're going to use physical orientation to help them with right and left.
That is pretty cool. I'm pretty amateur at swing dancing, as I'm sure most kids who take our program. But that sounds super fascinating. Is it still a dream of yours to one day own a studio? No, you're like, I'm done. I'm good.
Never turn it like, and I say this even though I considered this my hobby and now it's my job. When you find something you enjoy, that doesn't always mean to have it make money. Sometimes, because sometimes that can just ruin something for you. And also just there's like you never have nights off when you run a dance venue. Health insurance is a thing that if you're not making enough money to pay for your own health insurance, you don't have health insurance. There's a whole lot of decisions that go into what you do for a career, which is what you do for fun. And a lot of my friends do, like, that is their career and they love it. And I try to support them whenever I can. But I just decided that I wanted a job that was like, if not 9 to 5, like there was a start and end time during the day. And I could go hang out with my friends in the evenings and weekends when most people have free time.
Yeah.
So that was more important to me.
Yeah, no, that would make sense. Yeah, it would make sense. Yeah, this, I run the show Coder Kids, obviously, figuratively and literally this show. But like, yeah, it doesn't sleep. It doesn't, literally, it doesn't sleep. We have, our website is extremely popular in India. And
that's awesome.
It's great. I don't know that it's useful yet. I hope it is useful in terms of information we're providing in our blog. It's hard to know. But we have a ton of traffic from India, and they will message in with questions while I am sleeping, but the company is not sleeping. So I always respond if you're, in Bangladesh or if you're in India or Singapore. We get a bunch from Dubai also. Anyway, we're grateful for the web traffic, but you're right. Yeah, like it doesn't sleep, and with an online business that's like marketed to the world, it sleeps less than normal. So you're absolutely right about that, and that is something to take into account.
And also like if I get frustrated with swing dancing, or if I'm like getting burnt out, I can't. If I own a venue that's what I do, I can't stop.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons why I like coding so much is that you really aren't stuck in a language or stuck with a project. Like it's always, no matter what you work for. Like Fearless, I think, goes more towards shorter contracts. So we're not and that's kind of the point. But there are people who like work on the same thing all the time. But you can always improve, change. Like it's not stagnant.
That's awesome.
So if you're frustrated, it's not going to be a permanent thing.
Nice. So you appreciate flux then?
I appreciate flux, like a certain level of flux. Okay. Consistency is important, but what is consistent is, like I know people who like every 3 months, it seems like they're working on a new thing. That might be too much for me. But like, I think I've been working on my current project for a little over a year. I think that if in the next year or so, if I'm working on another project, I wouldn't be mad.
Okay.
So
interesting. And I think this is a really important point. You bring this up, and you're talking about your preferences. We're talking about work preferences. You're talking about work-life balance. Yeah. Dancing important. Preferences. Yeah. Your tolerance for falling on a crash mat, right? Like, is that what you called it?
Just how to fall.
Oh, okay.
I love circus so much, and I think it gives me a lot of the because I am bad at circus. I have people in my circus program who've been doing gymnastics since they were 2. They can like bend and all. I am the least flexible person I know, but we all like root each other on, and it's just like, oh, you were working on that for like the last month and you finally got it. Awesome job. I nailed a thing after working on it for years. So
Yeah.
And that feels so good. And it's because the program just really has really good people in it that don't treat, oh, you didn't get it now, that's okay, we'll try it again, or we'll find and we'll build up some endurance.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff.
I would need to build endurance for a long time. One of the things I think I might be good at gymnastics is I'm just really short. I'm like very, very short. I'm 5'4", and so like it's easier to build muscle and to like kind of like contain myself, and like I'm more like a jumping bean kind of body type. Where
But
like
I want to just say, like, good for you and good for me are two very different things. And I think that's also something that schools do, is that it really makes us look at, it's like, how good am I compared to other people? And a lot of the times that's not a good metric for it.
Yeah.
Because you were saying height is definitely a factor when it comes to physical stuff. So are you going to look at, like, if you try to play basketball, like I'm 5'1",
Sure.
my brother's 6'4".
Okay.
He's good at basketball in a way I will never be good at basketball, solely based on our heights. I'm also not that coordinated, so that's a whole other thing. But like so it's just kind of like, I was also comparing myself in school to people who were really good at math and who were like on the mathletes, and it just made sense to them, and I was like, no.
Yeah, it's so weird because, you know, on one hand, you have to like know about other people's performance, like roughly speaking, just to be in the same ballpark. But I think if that's all you do, then obviously that can be extremely toxic. So if you were to just stamp out the education system, replace it, you know, some of the things that you're saying, and maybe some that I'm inferring, you know, you want to be able to compare you to yourself. You want to compare different learning styles, different like systems of learning and approach, and then also work in groups and teams that are focused on succeeding as a group. This is something that Bryant talked about quite a bit, right, with the Scrum, is that like you can't build anything alone. With software today, it gets more and more complex, and it requires different sets of skills. Like, you know,
and you need more than just coders, and I think a lot of people forget that. And one of the things that I really love about my art history training is I also had to take art classes, which, if you want to talk about like comparing yourself to other people, I was an art major and I had to draw a self-portrait next to people who've been doing self-portraits for years. And the thing is, and the way I had such an amazing art class where your grade was determined on your progress in the class.
Oh.
Versus how good your art was to the teacher. So I actually almost got a full A+ in that class, because I was the second in line, because whoever made the most progress overall got just an A. Okay. One person beat me out to that, but I got an A-, so I was fine with that. But like, we drew a self-portrait at the beginning of the class and at the end of the class, and then throughout the semester we learned skills. Like, we learned how to do line work, we learned shading, we learned depth, we learned perspective, and then we applied it all at the end. And we looked at the first and the second, and that and how well you progress, how much you improved, it determined your grade. And I think that that's such a good, like, it was just celebrating progress versus celebrating milestones, which not that milestones aren't important and good tool and good measurement for like what to aim for, but milestones can move, and what you decide to do can change, but your progress is something you're consistently working on. But I also, so I took art classes. We have a designer on our team. She can talk color to me and I understand it perfectly. And I actually taught her how to code. I taught her some HTML stuff so she could just update like the content on the website. And I'm like, you're a coder now.
Nice.
But it's just this idea that like I couldn't do what she does. Like, web designers are incredible, and I don't think that a lot of people understand how hard it is to map out a user journey.
Yeah.
Because I get to take that hard work and then just like, to me, that's the hard work. It's like, oh, now I get to like, I know what has to happen. I just maybe have to do something like creative on the back end that no one's ever going to see. But it's the ability to be able to talk to one another. And now she understands a little bit more about coding. She understands like what I need to know. She's like, is this important to you? And I'll be like, no, I don't really like, we can change color. We can change like language. I need to have the bones. Once the bones are there, I can do almost anything. It's so flexible. And that makes it her job easier. So she's not spending the time on a finished product. She can get me the wireframe and then come back to me with the final like logos and everything later.
Yeah. Well, that is good. And I
so
think
it's all collaborative, and I think that schools really don't address that part of work.
Yeah, and that's tough. So sign up for Nicole's school for awesome kids.
Or sign up for Coder Kids and find also, just like you were saying, I was like, what should I prep? And you were like, what is something you want to tell people? I'm like, if you find what makes your kid excited, and I promise that's going to lead, like, I don't think necessarily like competitive sports, but like sports that focus on teamwork. And again, I think good sports teams will like focus on progress on the individual and as a team, and just get them out there and experiencing things. Because I think the more experiences, I think I'm a good coder based on, because I've tried so many things and I failed.
Like, this is awesome right here.
And I've learned that failure isn't the end. It's just an end. And I've clear, as you said, the protagonist doesn't die. I've figured it out.
Yeah.
I have failed at jobs. I have legit failed at jobs. Not the end of the world.
Well, that is great. I think that's a great place to end.
Where
it's okay to find an end. It's okay to find a dead end.
Endings are necessary.
You still have legs. You can go back and look at another way,
I could still be at a chocolate factory.
Right. I bet. Are they still around?
Yeah.
Okay.
Lilac Chocolates, they deliver anywhere in the U.S. So
this is our unofficial sponsor.
Unofficial sponsor.
So, awesome. Well, maybe someday when this episode in particular gets super popular, we'll get some chocolate sent our way or something. But thank you so much for your time. This has been an absolute blast.
Thank you for inviting me. No, I love talking. Clearly. Yeah.
This is really good, and this just shows, whether you think you're smart or whether you don't, or whether you like circus or you've done a bunch of different jobs. I think all of the roads to coding that we've talked about on the podcast, very few. I'm trying to think of a single person who thought, I'm going to be a coder, and then they went and did it. I think maybe one or two. Everybody else has been sideways. It's, I learned a little bit of MySpace, and that has happened several times. And then they'll come in sideways, and they'll see an opportunity and they'll take it. Some have started their own businesses and worked at Apple and Amazon. Some are doing their own thing in their own company. Yeah. There's all kinds of opportunities out there.
And the fact that kids, like, they're just growing up with technology, like, that boggles my mind. Like, there are kids who never take a coding class that understand how computers work.
Yeah.
That's insane to me.
Yeah. Yeah, it really does blow my mind. And so it's been a lot of fun. And I think you got to have that collaborative learning. You got to be able to test stuff out and work. And I think it's also important. I'm going to throw in a little bit of plug here for, the charity that we're doing, but to give people the opportunity to support those who wouldn't otherwise have those opportunities. What we're doing is we're founding a coding center in the slums of Quebec.
That's amazing.
The GoFundMe was completely funded. And so I'm so happy we're going to be...
Oh my gosh.
So that is kind of the latest on that. If you've been following that project or have donated in the past, So we're gonna see some updates on the
Yeah.
GoFundMe page, but elsewhere we're starting remodeling on this kind of house made out of storage containers.
That's awesome.
And we're gonna get tech into those kids' hands,
Yeah,
and
and
maybe
you
it'll work for
also
them and maybe not. But
if you at home are thinking, well, I'm not going to start a charity or whatever, or what,
I
like the
didn't
best
think.
thing the best thing you can do in the moment is look around and see if there's any, like, where is everyone else, and is there something I can do to help, whether it be like offer your assistance or help them find means. Like,
Yeah.
there's no one way to do something. You don't have to create a school.
Oh, for sure.
But that's amazing. I'm so happy you guys got to do that.
Well, and it'll be an ongoing process, but the last thing I thought would be like, oh, I'm gonna raise money for kids in Africa. Like, growing up in the '90s, like that was kind of a trope. But then somebody reached out from Cubetta, who grew up in the slums himself, was an IT guy, and was like, hey, this is my dream. And he reached out to hundreds of companies, and I'm the only one who messaged him back because, like, I think it sounded like a scam originally. But then it's like, it turns out he's legit. and so, but I think there are a lot of opportunities, whether it's close to home. I mean, there are a lot of opportunities close to home. And we volunteer at our church and stuff that I don't publicize. It's just, it's more something my wife and I do. But there are people that need emotional help and that need a shoulder to lean on. So, yeah, definitely. If you can, take care of yourself, and if you can, someone else as well. That's the Freakonomics line, right? So,
Right.
Well, thank you so much, Nicole, for being on the program.
James.
It was absolutely a great experience. And if anyone needs to reach out to you, what's the best way to do that?
Probably Twitter.
Okay.
I am at Nika Codes, which is Nika Codes.
Okay.
I don't like giving my email out just because it gets so overwhelming so quickly. But for some reason, Twitter is a lot less underwhelming. But no such thing as a stupid question. No one's dumb. They just may not be immediately good at something.
Sure. Yeah. Well, absolutely. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Until next time, we'll see you later. Oh, also, I forgot to add, please like, subscribe, rate us on iTunes, and do all that fun stuff. Thanks so much. That really helps the podcast grow. See you later.